Story 1. My family's past has been quite difficult. My grandmother had strong religious beliefs that caused many arguments with my mother. Because of this, we couldn't celebrate big holidays together. The only time I saw my grandmother was on my birthday, but she was too sick to travel, so we always had to go to her house instead. Every birthday, we took a 3-hour trip from our home in Worcester to Brunswick, and then a bit further east to visit her in Saturdead. My grandmother lived in a small red house with white trim by the coast. It was a beautiful place with a salty smell in the air and a gentle breeze. My grandmother was a weak woman who could barely move around, but she was determined to keep her house clean and tidy. It was always spotless, never a thing out of place. The view of the coastline from her house was stunning, and I always felt a sense of peace being there. Birthday celebrations at her house were simple. My grandmother didn't like giving or receiving gifts. Instead, we had a big meal and read aloud from one of her books. She was also an amazing piano player, and her playing was the best part of the visit. She could play beautiful, complicated pieces that filled the whole house with music. Plus, I would get to open my birthday gifts on the drive back home as a reward for behaving well. I remember one birthday when I was 8 years old. My mother and grandmother were cooking dinner, and my father had gone into town to get groceries, leaving me to explore on my own. I walked down to the water, following the cliffs. I found a small opening where 2 cliffs met, about 4 feet up. I climbed inside and discovered a cave. The tunnel was lined with strange blue flowers. I picked one to show my mum. The tunnel led to a large, round cave with 3 cracks in the wall where water flowed into a shallow pool. A beam of light made the walls sparkle, and I saw something even stranger. Water on the ceiling, like the surface of a lake, reflecting my image. The scene was magical, almost dreamlike. I stood there for a while, fascinated. I waved and my reflection waved back. I jumped and it jumped too. It didn't make sense. I smelled the blue flower, which didn't have any scent, but a petal tickled my nose, and I sneezed. A voice said, "Bless you." I looked up and noticed my reflection wasn't holding a flower. "Thanks," I said, but my reflection didn't move. It was then I realized it wasn't a reflection, but another boy who looked just like me. "Is it your birthday too?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm at my grandma's place," he said. "Me too. We're having sheep stew tonight." "Gross." "Yeah." We talked for a long time. We were similar but had some differences. His dad had a different name, they lived in a different town, and there were no blue flowers in his tunnel. As the light faded, I knew I had to head back. Before I left, we decided to try an experiment. We both climbed the cave walls, and I handed him the blue flower. He took it, promising to cherish it. "Happy birthday, other me," I called as I left. "Happy birthday, other me," he replied. Every year, I returned to see my other self. We shared stories about our lives and the gifts we hoped for, but things got worse for him each year. While I wished for toys and games, he wished for basic needs like his dad finding a job, a car for their family, or for the rain to stop hurting him. When I was 14, he told me he was attending his mum and grandma's funeral. He didn't stay long, and soon I was alone, staring at the shimmering ceiling. Seeing his struggles made me appreciate the life I had even more. That year, my grandmother gave me a special birthday gift, a silver cross necklace with my 14th birthday and her name engraved on it. It reminded me of how lucky I was. My grandmother passed away later that year, and we stopped visiting Saturdead. The memories of my other self faded, but I couldn't help but wonder how he was doing. As I grew up, I moved on with my life. I focused on school, work, and building a career. My wants and needs changed, but I kept the silver cross as a reminder of those years and how fortunate I was. When I turned 23, my mother died in a sudden accident. We had a small ceremony, and she wanted to be cremated and taken to her childhood home in Saturdead. My father was too injured to go, so I went alone to fulfill her last wish. Driving the familiar roads with her urn beside me, I remembered all the trips we had taken together, thinking about the sounds and memories of those journeys. So, I drove up to Saturdead, following the same roads we had taken so many times before. My mother was resting in a simple metal urn beside me. It was a long and silent trip, and I kept the radio off. I wanted to think about all the times we had driven there over the years, and what those trips used to sound like. As I drove, I thought about my other self and wondered if he was okay, how life had treated him. I felt a mix of sadness and gratitude. grateful for my own blessings and hoping that somehow things had gotten better for him. Of course, it had to rain. It rained about half the time we drove up to Chatter Blinds, and this time was no different. It was kind of fitting. Mum always loved the New England weather, with its misty rain and cloudy skies. When I arrived at my grandmother's old house, I was shocked to see how much it had changed. Without anyone to take care of it, the house had been taken over by nature. The weather and wildlife had done a lot of damage. Wasps had built nests in the rafters, and rats had made the basement their home. It felt like the house was now part of the wild, just planks and memories. I didn't plan on staying long. I was there to fulfill my mother's wish, then I would leave. But before I did, I went to my grandmother's bathroom. I needed to make sure I looked okay, so I shaved and straightened my shirt and tie. I also took a moment to cry and let out some of my sadness. I scattered my mother's ashes at the coast, just as she had wanted. My grandmother had been buried, but my mother had always been less religious. Even in death, they wanted to be together. I didn't fully understand it, but I respected her wishes. Before I left, I felt a strong urge to see if the cave from my childhood was still there. I wondered if it had all been real. It wasn't my birthday, so I didn't expect to see the other me, but I wanted to know if he ever existed. Maybe I had just imagined it all when I was a kid. I made my way down to the coastline, following the bottom of the cliffs. There was some overgrowth, but I found the entrance to the cave. I had grown quite a bit since I was last there, but I managed to squeeze through the opening. For a moment, I thought I might get stuck, but the tunnel widened as I went further in. When I reached the large spherical cave, everything looked the same, but a bit smaller. The cracks in the wall and the pool of water in the middle were still there, and above, I saw the floating reflection of another place. I didn't expect to see anyone, but there he was, the other me, waiting. He looked like me, but dressed differently. His hair was wild and bushy, and he wore makeshift clothes made from plastic bags, fashioned into a primitive raincoat. His cave was covered in the same blue flowers I had given him when we first met. Now I could see they were a type of sunflower. "Hey, me," he said. "Haven't seen you around." "You're real?" I asked. "You're really real?" "As real as you," he smiled. "For now, at least." "I thought I made this up," I admitted. "That it was just a game." "We did that too," he said. "But that doesn't make either of us less real." He explained that he had been hiding in the cave for some time. Things were bad outside. Storms battered the coast, and raiders roamed the main roads. The government had collapsed, and something else was out there, something dangerous. "People go missing at night," he said, "mostly during the storms. They talk about tall figures dragging people into the woods." He hadn't had a good night's sleep in months. He survived by hunting and fishing and got water from his grandmother's water pump. Drinking rainwater would make you go mad. "I don't think I'm going to make it," he admitted. "It's only a matter of time." It hurt to see him like that, like looking at a broken reflection of myself. I had been so lucky, and he had not. It felt unfair. The silver cross on my chest seemed to burn with guilt. I decided to help him. I climbed up the wall and reached out my hand. As a kid, I couldn't reach all the way up, but now I could. "Come on," I said. "I'll get you out of there." He climbed up on his side and reached out. Our fingers broke through the surface and touched. I grabbed his wrist and pulled, but neither of us had a good grip. We both slipped from the wall and ended up suspended in mid-air, holding on to each other. I was a bit heavier, maybe because of my diet or clothes, but slowly I pulled him through to my side. We fell into the pool in the middle of the cave. I hurt my tailbone, which would make the drive home uncomfortable, but the look of relief on his face made it worth it. He was free. "I'll consider this a belated birthday present," he said. "Thank you, other me." I wiped the sweat from my forehead and stood up. "You're welcome, other me." Leaving the cave together, I still couldn't believe what had happened. There were two of me now. How was that possible? But he was real. The moment we left the cave, he laughed, even though the rain was pouring down on us. "What's so funny?" I asked. "It doesn't hurt," he grinned. "It doesn't hurt at all." It seemed he got his birthday wish after all. He told me wild stories about his world, how everything fell apart in a few years. Lightning storms destroyed cities, death cults took over the streets, governments collapsed, and strange gravitational events occurred. "Before we lost the internet, we saw pictures of trees floating in the air," he explained. "It started happening downtown soon after." He had returned to the cave many times, not just for shelter, but to see what my life was like. For years, he assumed I faced the same struggles. I took him back to my car. My tailbone was killing me, so we decided to spend the night at my grandmother's house. The top floor was still in good shape, as long as we kept the windows closed to keep out the wasps. We shared sandwiches, and he ate like he hadn't seen food in days. "This looks just like her place," he said between bites, "but there's not much left of it." "I don't understand what happened," I said. "Was there never an explanation?" "It all happened at once. Earthquakes, meteors, solar flares, floods, everything. And it just kept getting worse." He struggled to talk about it. He had lost many people, and just thinking about it made his face twitch with pain. He excused himself to the bathroom and spent a long time there using my grooming kit. When he came out, he looked like a new person. Same hair, same beard. We could have been twins. In a way we were. We stayed up late that night, talking about everything. I told him about my job, my family, and my dreams for the future. He was amazed by it all. To him, my life sounded like everything he'd ever wanted. He was fascinated by the simple joys, like buying fresh fruit from the supermarket and the idea of getting married and taking care of a family. I had brought an extra set of clothes with me, so I gave them to him. He looked like a new person. As midnight came and went, we were both exhausted but too excited to sleep. We talked like two identical voices in the dark, almost like one person talking to themselves. "I'll get my own life," he said. "It'd be weird for both of us to stay in the same place." "Yeah," I agreed. "I can help you get started. Just get me a train ticket and I'll be on my way." He talked about South America and how he had regretted not visiting the rainforest before everything went wrong in his world. Now he felt like he had a second chance. I don't remember falling asleep, but I did. It didn't last long, though. I woke up to the sound of someone running, and when I opened my eyes, I saw the other me bursting through the door. He had been outside in the rain. I sat up and looked at him curiously. I reached for my phone to check the time, but realized I had left it in my other pair of pants, the ones he had borrowed. I was still wearing my formal clothes. The other me had my phone, wallet, and keys. I noticed he was holding my keys. He looked frazzled, like he had been running. His eyes darted from me to the window and back to me. "There's something outside," he said. "I went to check it out." "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head, trying to find the right words. "I don't know," he admitted. "I think something's following me." I looked out the windows but didn't see anything. As we stood there, we heard scratching sounds, like a tired dog trying to open a door. We listened, and the other me whispered, "Hear that? It's here. Something's here." We heard a door open, and something stepped inside on the bottom floor. It was only a matter of time before it found us. The other me suggested we run for it, but I had a different idea. We could climb out the window, cross the roof, and go down the ladder on the other side. My grandmother had an old-fashioned fireplace, so there was a chimney, and with a chimney comes the need for a chimney sweep, so there was a ladder bolted to the side of the house. We opened the window and climbed outside. I helped the other me up, and we tiptoed across the metal roof. It was a corrugated metal roof, and it was very slippery in the rain. The sound of the raindrops masked our footsteps. When we reached the ladder, I stopped and whispered, "Hand me the keys. I'll get the car started." He hesitated. It was like looking into a mirror, but something was different. I knew myself well enough to read my own face, and we were feeling something very different. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. Either way, he wasn't handing me the keys. "Come on," I urged him. "We need to be quick." "I can drive," he said. "Don't worry, just go." "You've never driven this car before," I said. "I got this." "No," he whispered back. "I got this." I didn't like it, but there was no time to argue. There was an intruder in the house, and we had to get going. I climbed down first, and the other me followed. I almost slipped a couple of times because the ladder rungs were wet from the rain. My fingers got stained with rust. As soon as I stepped off the ladder, I knew something was wrong. There were shapes in the rain. They looked human, but they were taller, slender, and unnaturally dark. Even in the dim moonlight, I could see them against the night. They were just like the other me had described, tall people hiding in the dark. The other me got off the ladder, and we ran to my car. I went to the driver's seat out of habit, but the door was locked. The other me had the keys, and was fumbling with the buttons, not sure which one to press. I held out my hand. "Give me the keys," I said. "I can do it." "No," he insisted. "Just give me a minute." "This is my car," I snapped. "I'll help you, but you need to cooperate." He didn't say a word. He kept trying to figure out the keys until he hit the wrong button, the panic button. I had never used it before, and suddenly the night lit up with blinking headlights. The sound of the rain was drowned out by a loud, shrieking alarm. I grabbed the other me's hand to take the keys back, but he pushed me away. He said something, but I couldn't hear him over the alarm. Then I turned around. The dark shapes were coming closer. They had formed a circle around us. The other me finally managed to turn off the alarm. My ears were ringing, and my heart was pounding in my chest. My tongue felt dry, and my rust-stained fingers were getting cold.
"It's him!" the other me shouted. "I was here first. It's him you want."
I stared at him, not understanding what he was saying or why. It didn't make any sense. He dangled the car keys like he was trying to attract an animal.
"Look, see?" he continued. "These are my keys. This is my car. He's just trying to take it."
"What are you doing?" I asked. What is this?"
"I'm not part of this," he shouted. "Just take him away and leave me alone."
The tall shapes moved closer. One of them was about 9 feet tall, with arms that reached its ankles. It had a long, elongated neck, and its head moved like a prehensile tail, bobbing at strange angles. Even up close, it was still just a dark shape. I couldn't see any muscles or bones, but they were definitely coming my way. They were listening.
"What are you doing?" I repeated. "I pulled you out, and now you're betraying me."
"No, I pulled you out," he shouted back. "Just look at us. Which one looks like they belong? The one with the keys, the wallet, and the phone, or the one with nothing, shouting in the rain?"
"Unlock my phone then," I yelled. "If it's yours, you can unlock it."
He pulled out the phone, hesitated, and then entered a code. The phone unlocked. I had forgotten that we were the same person. We used the same code. He just had to think about what he would have picked and enter it. The shapes turned their attention to me. As they moved closer, I panicked. I rushed at the other me, tackling him to the ground. We fought in the dirt. The keys got lost in the struggle, but I could tell I was no match for him. He had been in many more fights than me, and it showed. He wasn't afraid to hurt me. I barely avoided a grip that would have broken my wrist. I got a few punches in, but nothing serious. He, on the other hand, hit me hard in the jaw with his elbow. As soon as it hit, I knew I'd have trouble eating for a few days. I was losing badly. They believed him, and I was getting beaten up. I had to do something, but I was out of ideas. He fought his way out of my grip and pushed me away from the car. He picked up the keys and pointed at me.
"Enough!" he yelled. "It's over!"
The shapes came closer, now within arm's reach. One of them grabbed the collar of my shirt with a dark, four-fingered hand. It pulled me forward, as if trying to drag me back to the cave. I struggled, but it was no use. The grip was like a vice. It was inhuman. More of them joined in. One grabbed my arm, another took my leg. They lifted me easily, like I was a small child causing trouble. I kicked, punched, and fought, but I only hurt myself. I could feel bruises forming on my arms and legs. I didn't know what they wanted, but I couldn't let it happen. If they took me away, I wouldn't come back. "There's been a mistake," I pleaded. "Please, you have to believe me. There's been—" I twisted as hard as I could. Something around my neck snapped loose. My grandmother's silver cross. One of the shapes stopped and brought the cross up to its head. I couldn't see any eyes, but it seemed to be inspecting it. An idea struck me. "I got it from my grandmother," I said. "That's mine. It's dated after his grandmother died, so it can't be his, right?" The figures didn't move. I looked back and forth between them, but there was no discussion, not a word spoken, not a look exchanged. It was as if they were frozen in time. The cold rain drenched my face as they slowly put me down on the ground. It felt like being surrounded by moving trees, these immense, towering creatures, tall enough to block out the moonlight. They turned their attention back to the other me, dropping the silver cross into my open palm. He had reached the car and started it. I could hear him screaming in frustration as he struggled with the buttons. He had never driven an automatic before, it seemed. He got the car to move, but he didn't get far. These things were fast when they needed to be. They didn't run. It was more like they slid across the ground like ice skaters. It was eerie, like they were being carried through the air effortlessly. The other me barely made it out of the driveway before one of the car doors was torn off. Seconds later, I heard his scream change from an angry yell to a desperate plea, the same voice I had just used myself. They carried him off as he screamed like a wounded animal. In his final moment, he looked at me. Even though he was far away, I could hear his voice clearly, his voice, my voice. "You don't know what you've done," he cried. "You don't know! You don't know!" And then nothing remained but the rain. I found my things on the passenger side of the car. The keys were still in the ignition. I would have to get the door fixed, but apart from that, I was okay. Well, apart from the beating I had taken, I just wanted to forget about the whole thing. But to do that, I needed to check one final thing, the cave. After collecting my thoughts, I went back down there. By the time I reached the big open cave, the rain had stopped. Looking up, there was no more reflection. Whatever had allowed me to see the other side was gone, and with it, the other me. It was just a cave with a little pool of water. I didn't know what to feel. I was relieved, of course, but also terrified. How would I know what to make of this? What if he came back? Ever since that day, I always get this eerie feeling that something is lurking behind the eyes of my reflection. Like it isn't really a reflection, but an image of the other me in that other place. I imagine that he remembers me, that he knows, that he has to play along for now, waiting for another opportunity to come through. There are no mirrors in my home anymore. I have to distance myself from those thoughts, but the distance doesn't make my worries any less real. Maybe it will never happen. Maybe I'll never see that place or the other me ever again. Or maybe the truth is something even worse. Story 2. It was while I was buying supplies in Heidelberg that I heard about the massacre at the old mill. The night before, I had heard 2 loud pops, like a car backfiring. It could have been gunshots. While I was at Miller's General Store, the housewives were whispering about how the police had raided the Brides of Christendom compound up north. They found terrible things there. Most of the women were killed in the shootout. I saw the newspaper rack and thought about buying one, but I didn't. The world is already wicked enough without paying to read about it. When I started my truck, it coughed twice before the engine finally caught. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, remembering what Pastor Weber had said about God's justice being beyond human understanding. The small bag of hard candies for Hannah burned a hole in my pocket. Sugar may rot teeth and discipline, but a father provides. Those brides were not right. Everyone knew it. They would wander through town in their white dresses with faces as blank as china dolls, handing out pamphlets about salvation. I couldn't tell you exactly what they believed or about the young women who joined and were never seen again. Not right at all, but murder is still murder, even in a police raid. The 6th commandment makes no exceptions. I decided I would pray for them tonight. The drive home took me deeper into the Schwarzwald, where the roads twist like black ribbons through ancient pines. Few people come this far into the mountains. Sometimes hikers wander onto my property from the Hexenweg trail that runs 3 kilometers east. They never stay long. Something about this part of the forest makes people uneasy. The way the trees grow too close together, and how the sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor even at midday. My cabin is half hidden in a natural hollow. Built it myself 10 years ago when Hannah was still small enough to carry. There's no electricity and no phone line, just rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, and a steep roof to shed the heavy mountain snows. The root cellar keeps our food from spoiling, and the stream running behind the cabin never freezes, even in the depths of winter. It's not much, but it's what the Lord provides. It's a hard place for a child. I see that in how Hannah watches the hiking families that pass by, their children dressed in bright store-bought clothes and laughing easily. Sometimes she stands at the window long after they've gone, fingers pressed against the glass like she's trying to hold on to their echo. But hardship builds character, and comfort breeds sin. Hannah was waiting on the porch when I pulled up, looking like a scarecrow in her hand-me-down dress. She watched me unload without offering to help, thin arms wrapped around herself against the cold. That's just how she is, quiet and watchful. The doctors in town called it developmental delays, but I know better. The Lord made her exactly as she needed to be. We ate our dinner in silence, venison stew and hard bread. The kerosene lamp threw our shadows long against the wall, making the crucifixes seem to dance. Hannah's eyes kept darting to the windows, now black with night. Her spoon scraped against her bowl in a way that would normally earn her a stern look. Tonight, I let it pass. The woods had been strange lately. Not wrong, exactly. God's creation can never be wrong, but different. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. The deer had become scarce, birds quieter. Even the wind moved differently through the trees, making sounds that sometimes almost seemed like words. I had lived in these woods long enough to know their moods. Sometimes the ancient places of the world grow heavy with his presence. These deep woods are closer to God, raw and untamed as the day he made them. The people in town don't understand this.
They've wrapped themselves in electric lights and television static, distancing themselves from his touch. But out here, you feel the weight of creation. Some days it presses down harder than others. The first scream came just after sunset. It was distant, could have been an animal, but something about it raised the hair on my neck. Hannah's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Papa," she whispered, her voice high and scared, like when she was 7 and found a dead fox in the yard, its belly split open and steaming in the winter air. What was that? It could be nothing, I said, but my hand was already moving toward the rifle above the fireplace. We waited, holding our breaths. Then again, another scream, distant and high-pitched. This time it almost sounded like laughter. I took down the hunting rifle, checking the chamber out of habit. I keep my weapons clean as scripture demands a man keep his soul. "Stay inside. Lock the door behind me." "Papa, please." Her voice cracked, and she grabbed my sleeve with both hands. Something she hadn't done since she was very small. "There's something wicked out there." I frowned down at her. "How do you know?" "I feel it," she insisted, tugging more urgently. Like when you know a storm's coming before you see the clouds. "God is warning me, deep in my tummy." "If what you say is true," I replied, gently pulling free from her grip, "then who better to protect his realm than his most devoted servant?" She had nothing to say to that. The truth has a way of silencing doubt. The night air was like a hammer of ice. Moonlight turned the forest silver white, each tree casting a prison bar shadow across the frozen ground. My breath came in clouds as I moved between the pines, rifle ready. The woods were different at night, every shadow deeper, every sound louder. Another cry echoed through the trees, closer now. It could have been the wind through the valleys, but wind doesn't sob like that. Through the trees, I saw something white flicker, maybe cloth catching moonlight, but there shouldn't be anything out here. We're miles from the nearest neighbor. I know every inch of these woods like I know my prayers. I moved closer, boots crunching on the frozen leaves. More movement ahead, quick, darting. My flashlight beam caught nothing but trees and shadows, but the ground told a different story. Bare footprints in the frost, small and precise like a dancer's, and something else. Dark spots in the snow that could have been blood. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin in the vast silence. "This is private property." The woods went dead quiet, not even wind in the trees, just the sound of my own breathing, harsh in the stillness. My flashlight caught something hanging from a branch, a scrap of white fabric, edge stained dark. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand. It was old, smelled of pine needles and something else, sweet decay, like overripe fruit. When I reached the cabin, Hannah was standing on the porch. The kerosene lamp behind her cast her shadow long and narrow across the snow, like a crack in the earth. "Did you shoot them?" "Papa," she asked, her voice small but steady. "Did you shoot the witches?" The question hit like a slap. "What did you say?" Hannah shifted on her feet, looking down at her bare toes turning blue in the cold. A suspicion crossed my mind. "Did you read the newspaper when it was delivered this morning?" I asked sharply. "You know what I've told you about throwing them away, about not filling your head with that sort of thing." Hannah just shifted on her feet, looking down at her bare toes. Disapproval burned hot in my belly. Lord, forgive the child her disobedience. That night, as we knelt for evening prayer, Hannah's hands tightened in mine as we recited the Lord's Prayer together. "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." Her fingers felt like ice in my grip. Behind us, the windows rattled in a sudden gust of wind, and I could have sworn I heard laughter carried on the breeze, high and wild like breaking glass. The next day passed just like most days. After breakfast, hard bread and the last of our applesauce, we started Hannah's lessons. She is smart when she wants to be, though she has been more distant lately, but she worked through her multiplication tables without complaining, recited her verses from Proverbs, and copied passages from the few history books I keep in the house. Around midday, Hannah went to take care of the goats she loves so much. They are strange animals. They showed up during the first frost of winter, maybe drawn by the smoke from our chimney, or the scraps Hannah sometimes leaves out. There are 3 of them, all with rough black coats and bright eyes. They don't give milk or have babies, but Hannah loves them. I let her keep them, even though I thought it might be a bad idea. They don't need much food. They like the sparse grass and leaves during the warmer months, and they handle winter well. I made a mistake a few years ago by killing some rabbits Hannah had raised since they were little. She didn't talk to me for months after that, so I let her keep the goats, not wanting to upset her again.
I prayed that God would forgive me for indulging my little girl this way. What better to love than one of God's creatures? The rest of the day we did our chores, splitting wood, checking the traps, and preserving the little game they had caught. We ate our dinner in our usual silence, the wind whispering through the gaps in the logs. That night, something woke me up. Maybe it was a sound, or maybe it was just the feeling of someone watching me. I opened my eyes and saw a woman staring through my window. The moon lit up her face, making it look silver. She was smiling. No, her face was split by a smile, stretched impossibly wide across features that seemed to shift and flow like melting candle wax. Her eyes were dark hollows, reflecting nothing. She looked not quite human, like she was wearing humanity as a mask that didn't fit well. I reached for my rifle, not taking my eyes off her. When I looked back, she was gone, but I saw a flash of white disappearing into the trees. Without thinking, I put on my boots and coat. The rifle was loaded. I always keep it loaded these days. Hannah stirred in her bed across the room. "Go back to sleep," I whispered. "Papa needs to check something." The night air was very cold. I heard laughter again, high and wild like breaking glass. There it was, another glimpse of white between the black trunks of the pines. I followed, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. She vanished into the darkness ahead, leaving no footprints I could see. I was about to turn back when I heard it, a strange huffing sound, like an animal digging. Following the noise, I pushed through a group of young pines into a small clearing. There she was, lit by the moonlight. She was on her hands and knees, clawing at the frozen ground like a mad thing. Her white dress was dirty now, torn and stained with soil. As she dug, she made a sound that raised the hair on my neck, a mixture of giggles and pants, rhythmic and desperate, not human, not quite. I raised my rifle. The sound of the bolt cycling made her head snap up, and for a moment our eyes met. Then she bolted, moving with that same unnatural speed I had seen before, disappearing between the trees like smoke. I took a step to follow, then stopped. Something was wrong. The air had grown thick, heavy with a presence I could feel pressing against my back like a physical weight. Slowly, I turned around. The hole drew me forward. I didn't want to approach it. Everything in me screamed to run, but my feet moved on their own. As I drew closer, I saw the ground around it was scored with deep scratches, dozens of fingernail marks in the frozen earth overlapping each other. Multiple sets of hands had dug this, tearing through soil and frost with bare fingers. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it like I know my prayers, but I found myself leaning forward, looking into that absolute darkness. Something looked back. Hidden and hungry, it reached up through that hole and touched me. Not with hands or claws, but with a presence that turned my bowels to water and my legs to jelly. I soiled myself like a child, scrambling backward, my mind unable to process what I had felt. The weight of judgment, but not God's judgment. Something older, something that had been waiting. I ran until my lungs burned and branches whipped my face bloody. I ran until I burst through our cabin door, waking Hannah with my panicked entrance. "Papa?" Her voice was small and frightened. "What's wrong? What happened?" I grabbed her hands and pulled her from her bed. "Pray with me," I demanded. "Pray until sunrise." "Papa, you're hurting me." "Pray!" We knelt there on the rough wooden floor, my hands gripping hers too tightly as I recited prayer after prayer. Hannah tried to ask questions, but I shushed her harshly. This was more important. With each passing hour, as grey dawn came closer, understanding grew in my mind like a revelation. The white robe that woman in the woods was wearing, I recognized it. The same white dress those brides of Christendom wore. The massacre at their compound hadn't been senseless violence after all. It had been divine intervention. Those women, those things, they had been planning something, digging something up that should have stayed buried. But the police, with all their guns and authority, had failed. Evil still lurked in these woods, scratching at the earth with bloody fingers. That's why God had shown me the truth. Me, who had rejected the modern world's comforts and temptations. Me, who had raised my child in righteous solitude, unwavering in my faith, while others grew soft and complacent. I alone had been chosen to finish what the authorities had started. I alone had the strength and purity of spirit to face this evil. My years of devotion had led to this moment, this divine purpose. "Papa," Hannah whispered as the first light touched our windows. "You're crying." I touched my cheek and felt wetness there. They were tears of joy, I assured her. The days after that night blurred together. I tried to keep them clear in my head, but my thoughts were muddled. My mind focused on this one task I now held above all else. Hannah's lessons went untaught, and the traps unchecked. It was a necessary sacrifice I knew she would understand in time. Greater things were at play, terrible consequences to be had if I did not follow through with my purpose. I spent my days lost in scripture, finding echoes of myself in Moses and Elijah. At night, I would walk through the dark forest, listening for fingers scratching against frozen earth, or that strange, hitching laughter. I would only return when dawn threatened the horizon, sure, somehow, that this evil was a creature of darkness. Time didn't matter to me anymore. I was so close to something glorious. Every morning, I would hear Hannah stoking the fire and trying to stretch our small supplies into something like breakfast. Her movements grew slower each day, and she looked more fragile, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying that night's vision, seeing that terrible hole in every shadow and dark corner. "Papa, we need food," Hannah would say, her voice getting smaller and more careful with each passing day. She held up our last jar of preserves like it was evidence in a trial, the root cellars almost empty. "God provides for his chosen ones," I would reply, running my hand along my rifle's barrel for the 100th time that hour. Remember how he fed the Israelites in the desert. Trust in his providence. And wasn't I proved right when Hannah would return from her daily wanderings, her apron full of blackberries and her dirty hands holding pale mushrooms like they were gifts? "See how he provides," I would tell her, but she would just stare at me with those huge, hollow eyes. "See," I would tell her, "see how he provides for us." By the end of the first week, sleep became a distant memory. Each night, I would pace our small cabin, muttering prayers and checking my rifle, waiting for darkness to fall so I could go on my sacred hunt again. Sometimes I caught Hannah watching me, her face looking thin in the lamplight. Her silence felt like judgment, and that judgment made me feel something hot and dangerous in my chest. One night, deep in the woods and thirsty from hours of searching, I stopped to drink from a still pond. Moonlight turned the water's surface into mirror-like glass. As I bent to drink, I saw them, great wings of silver white spreading from my shoulders, shimmering with holy purpose. I was transformed, become an angel of judgment. The vision filled me with righteous fire. I spent hours praying now, my voice growing hoarse as I thanked God for choosing me, for showing me his divine purpose. Hannah would kneel beside me, trembling with what I thought was religious fervor, though now I wonder if it was simply hunger or fear. "Papa," she said one morning, her small hands clutching my sleeve like a drowning person grabbing a rope. "The goats are acting strange. They followed you last night. I saw them from the window." "Of course they did," I replied, stroking her hair with affection. "I am their shepherd, as Christ is mine. Did he not say, 'My sheep hear my voice'? And I know them, and they follow me? But there's something wrong with them. They're not normal. They haven't eaten in weeks. We've no grass, but they're growing all fat." I silenced her with a kiss on top of her head, though her high-pitched voice had begun to grate on me. "I'll be back before dawn," I promised her, and left. The goats accompanied me most nights now, their black forms moving like shadows between the trees. Sometimes I would preach to them as we walked, explaining my holy mission. They would listen with tilted heads, their rectangular pupils reflecting the moonlight like tiny golden crosses. 10 days in, I stopped reading scripture altogether. What need did I have for ancient words when God spoke to me directly now? I could feel his presence in every rustle of wind through the pines, every crunch of snow under my boots. The woods themselves seemed to whisper their approval of my quest. Hannah grew more insistent, more troublesome. One morning I found her trying to pack a bag with our few remaining possessions. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "We need help, Papa," she whispered. "You're not well. Pastor Weber would understand." I struck the bag from her hands, sending our last cup of flour spilling across the floor. "Pastor Weber is a blind fool who coddles his flock with soft words and softer doctrine. God has chosen me for this task." "Me alone." She flinched away from my rage, and something in her retreat thrilled me. Yes, fear was appropriate. Respect. Long had it been absent. 2 weeks passed by slowly, each night the same. Hannah and I knelt together in prayer, her voice a timid echo of mine as we sought meaning and proof that my faith was not only righteous, but chosen by God. My faith burned fierce and hot, devouring any doubts before they had time to grow. But tonight, something changed. She opened the Bible, my Bible, without asking for permission.
Her fingers trembled, but her voice had a strange strength. Proverbs 16:18, as she said, the words tight in her throat like they didn't want to come out. Then she read aloud, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." I stared at her. It took a few seconds for the weight of the verse to sink in like a stone on my chest. "Is there something you want to say, Hannah?" My voice was calm, almost gentle, too calm. Her eyes met mine, unflinching and hard. "I miss you, Papa," she whispered. "I fear for your soul." The words hit me like a punch. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt doubt. It slid into me like a slick, oily serpent, winding its way through the cracks of my certainty. And then came the rage, hot, sharp, and purifying. I snatched the Bible from her hands, the leather binding creaking. "How dare you?" I heard myself say, as though from a distance. "You think you know better than me? Better than him? I have been chosen, Hannah, chosen. I have seen his glory with my own eyes, and you dare to question me?" Her lip trembled. "You haven't been chosen," she cried, her voice high with terror. "You're arrogant and vain and mean, and I hate you." I jumped to my feet, hand raised to strike her, but she was already moving. She ran for the door, her bare feet slapping against the wooden floorboards. "Hannah!" I shouted, but she didn't stop. The door slammed behind her. I lunged for the handle only to hear the scrape of wood. She was wedging something under the knob from outside. For a moment I stood there, panting, my hand frozen. On the other side of the door I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, fearful. "I'll do it myself," she screamed through the door, her voice cracking with terror and determination. "Whatever's out there, I'll be the one to stop it. Then you'll have nothing left." "Hannah!" I slammed my palm against the door. When she didn't answer, I forced my voice to be calmer. "Hannah, let me out." I heard her breathing hitch on the other side. "You'll be okay," she said. "You'll come back once it's done." "Hannah!" Terror laced through my veins like ice. She couldn't. It was my destiny, my duty. I hauled back and kicked the door, my leg hitting solid oak. I heard her sharp cry, her footsteps running away, toward the woods, off to steal what was rightfully mine. The axe leaned by the fireplace, its handle smooth from years of use. I took it in hand, its weight steadying me. She had no right. No child could understand the burden I carried, the divine purpose that flowed through me like fire. I swung the axe. The first blow sent cracks running through the wood. The second blow showered splinters across the floor. Through the jagged hole, I saw her, a ghostly blur in her white nightgown, vanishing into the line of trees beyond the yard. She moved fast, faster than I thought she could, but I was faster. I let the axe fall from my fingers. I reached for the rifle above the mantel instead. It was a shepherd's crook for a shepherd's duty. I wouldn't let her defy me, not like this. The cold air bit at my lungs as I ran through the night, my breath steaming, the rifle steady in my hands. The trees swallowed her up, but I could hear her, branches snapping, undergrowth rustling. Each crack of a twig was like a beacon calling me onward. Behind me came another sound, familiar. The goats were following, their hooves striking the frozen ground with a deliberate rhythm. It wasn't just footsteps. It was a rhythm, a beat that matched my pulse. Their soft bleating rose, but it wasn't the plaintive call of livestock. It sounded like laughter, low and mocking, as if they understood more than they should. Ahead, the moonlight spilled through the canopy, and I swore I saw it, the glimmer of her nightgown, the flash of her small, pale face. She wouldn't get far, not from me. I felt my angel wings spread wide, their shadow stretching across the frostbitten ground. The forest loomed, dark and waiting, as I chased my wayward lamb into its depths. And then I saw her. Hannah knelt in a clearing, her nightgown stark against the black earth. Her hands clawed at the frozen ground, raw and bloodied, as she scraped at the edges of that terrible chasm. Somehow, she had found it, as though it had been waiting, ready all this time. My chasm, my purpose, the culmination of everything I had sacrificed. "Stop!" The word ripped from my throat, and I leveled the rifle at her narrow back. She froze, her trembling frame caught in the silver light of the moon. "This isn't for you," I said, stepping closer. "It's mine. This was meant for me." She didn't turn around. Her voice, when it came, was small. "Papa, I can feel it. The wrongness. It's in the air. It's in you." The rifle felt steady in my grip. I pointed it at her, my daughter, my lamb turned defiant wolf.
Step away from the hole, now. She stood slowly, her small figure pale and fragile in the moonlight. The snow clung to her nightgown, turning it to rags, but she didn't shiver. Behind her, the goats gathered, their burning eyes locked on me, their mouths hung open, jaws pulled back from stained yellow teeth in strange grins. I edged closer, the rifle aimed at Hannah's heart. The chasm yawned before me, its edges jagged and dark, the void within pulsing like a hungry, open mouth. From its depths came a whisper, low and syrupy, coiling around my mind. "How big and juicy you've gotten," it said. "How fat and swollen. Are you here to stop me, Thomas?" "Yes," I panted, my heart thudding in my chest, "as only I can." "But of course," the voice crooned, "nobody is as strong as you, nobody as smart or as devoted. This is why God chose you." I couldn't help it. The words were a balm to my cracked soul, sweeter than honey. "Yes," I whispered, the rifle trembling in my hands. Yes, that's right." "What?" "How proud you must be." And I was. Pride swelled inside of me, so much of it that I felt like I might burst. A cry tore from my throat as a weight struck my back. Hannah's small body slammed into me with all the force she could muster, and I stumbled, my boots skidding on the loose earth at the edge of the chasm. I teetered there, the rifle slipping from my grasp as my boots lost their grip, the brittle edge crumbling beneath me. For one awful moment, I was weightless, plunging into the scorching void, but my hands shot out, grabbing the rim just before I disappeared entirely. My fingers dug into the frozen earth, nails splintering as the ground shifted under my grip. Below me, the abyss boiled with unnatural heat, a blistering force that pressed against my skin, alive and hungry, dragging at me as though it had been waiting for this moment. "Hannah!" my voice cracked. "Help me, please, I'm your father." She stood over me, silhouetted by the moonlight, her face streaked with tears that gleamed like silver as they froze on her cheeks. "You taught me to listen to God's voice," she said, her words faltering but determined. "But you stopped listening a long time ago. Hannah." My grip was failing, the earth crumbling beneath my fingers. She lowered her head, her voice trembling as she spoke our prayer. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." I choked on my breath, the weight of my own words thrown back at me. "You're wrong. You're wrong." My voice rose to a scream. "I am your father. I am chosen. I am—" Her foot came down on my fingers. The pain was white hot, a burning betrayal. My grip gave way and I plunged into the darkness. As I fell, the last thing I saw were the goats, silhouetted by the moon, peering over the edge at me. And Hannah, my lamb, standing tall as she watched me go. My final thought was bitter and sharp, cutting through the blackness. At least I felt like Lucifer, defiant, proud, until the end. Story 3. I'm not sure when she stopped loving me. Maybe it was when I lost my job, or when I was hospitalized for my mental breakdown, or maybe it was when she started having an affair with her personal trainer, Matthew. Who knows? All I know is that when she ended our relationship, it broke me. The thought of life without her was impossible for me to understand. Alicia and I had been together since we were 15 years old, high school sweethearts. When we were both 19, I proposed to her. I still remember how scared I was. I was a nervous wreck. But somehow she said yes, and we started our life together. That was 16 years ago. We were inseparable, unstoppable. Until June of this year. It replays in my mind over and over. In January, I was laid off from work. They said it was to cut costs, the usual excuse, but the bills kept coming. The mortgage still needed to be paid, and we still needed food on the table. Her handmade jewelry business wasn't making enough money. I had always promised to provide for her so she could do what she loved. But here I was, being turned down for every job I applied for, taking out loans wherever I could, borrowing from anyone who would lend me money. But still, we were days away from losing the house. The stress was too much, the guilt was too much, so much so that in March, I found myself walking down a busy highway. No clothes, no shoes, and no memory of how I got there. A passerby called the police, who took me to the local hospital. They tested me for alcohol and drugs, but found I was completely sober. They concluded that I had suffered a mental breakdown due to stress and sent me to the nearest mental health facility. After seeing movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Girl Interrupted, I didn't have high hopes for this place. But to my surprise, it was great. The doctors and nurses were incredibly helpful, the therapy sessions were wonderful,
and the other patients were people just like me, who had lost their way. Alicia visited me a few times, but she seemed off, cold even. I thought I was just overthinking because of my mental state. After a few months, they found medication that worked for me and coping techniques that helped me calm down. I was finally going home. To Alicia. I couldn't wait. But when I got home, I realized her cold demeanor was real. She looked at me differently. She stopped talking to me unless it was absolutely necessary. She started going to the gym more than she was home. Then, in mid-June, she said the 5 words I dreaded the most. I can't do this anymore. My heart sank and my knees buckled. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. Please, I'll do anything. Just give me another chance, I begged. I must have looked so pathetic, but I was overcome with emotion. She was my everything, my reason for living. I couldn't remember life before her, but her expression never changed. She wouldn't even look at me. I'm sorry. I've met someone else. I tried. I really did. But you've changed. You're not the man I remember. You're like a shell of him. I love you. I always will. But it's not enough. Truth be told, I saw this coming, but I was still caught off guard. And with that, she turned and picked up 2 bags that were already packed by the doorway. I hadn't even noticed them. And that was it. I was alone. Alone for the first time in my life. No one to turn to. My parents were long gone, and any friends I had drifted away when I was hospitalized, or when I constantly asked them to lend me money. But I still had my weekly therapy sessions. You know it's not your fault, Adam. You need to stop blaming yourself, Dr. McAllister said in a reassuring tone, looking at me over the top of her glasses, notebook and pen in hand. Unfortunately, things like this happen, but we have to find a way to go on. Have you been doing those written exercises I recommended? Yeah, I muttered, while staring at the carpet. It was so filthy and cheap-looking. When was the last time it was vacuumed? And that smell. It was some fruity-scented candle that was so overpowering it was sickening. Have you been taking your medication? Dr. McAllister asked in a condescending tone. I could tell by the way she asked that she doubted me. Of course I have, I snapped, but pills can't fix everything. Dr. McAllister sighed. Listen, Adam, between you and me, I've been through more breakups than I'd like to admit, even one divorce. Every single one feels like the end of the world. Trust me, I know. But somehow, we find a way to carry on. It takes time and a lot of strength, but we manage eventually. I wish I could give you some amazing advice that would instantly take away your pain, but I'm just a therapist. I don't have a magic wand. Unfortunately, when it comes to something like this, it's something you have to get through on your own. The tunnel will be long and dark, but there is light at the end, and you will make it. Wow, thanks, Dr. McAllister. I could have gotten that advice from any magazine, I thought to myself as I walked out of her bleak, fruity-smelling office. I left the office and let out a huge sigh. What a waste of time. I had no choice but to go home and stick to my new nightly routine. 2 six-packs and hours of video games. It was my way of turning off my brain for a few hours. I walked into my eerily empty, silent house, kicked off my shoes, and threw my keys in the bowl by the door. I tossed my jacket on the couch and made my way to the kitchen. The dishes were piled high. Honestly, the house was a mess. Alicia would be disgusted, but I didn't care. There was no one here to see the mess I lived in, the mess I had become. I went to the fridge and grabbed a can of Miller. I didn't particularly care for the taste, but it was cheap, and I certainly wasn't rolling in money. I had a divorce to pay for and a house to try and save. I was living on ramen, for God's sake. Safe to say, I was broke. I went into the living room and threw myself onto the couch with a thud, staring at the dimly lit ceiling. I had made a habit of turning on as few lights as possible. I had to save on the electricity bill, and to be honest, I always found the dark quite comforting. I spent hours wandering around in Elden Ring until I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. I might as well try to sleep. I got up to turn off the TV since I had lost the remote during a fit of rage a couple of weeks back. I stumbled to the TV and glanced at the mirror above the fireplace. I never understood the whole mirror over the fireplace thing. A lot of people aren't even tall enough to see themselves in it. Alicia was one of them, but she insisted on putting this huge vintage rectangular mirror with a gold baroque border above the fireplace. I always found it tacky, but according to her, I just had no taste. I looked at my reflection and squinted. What happened to me? My face was covered in stubble. My eyes had huge black rings around them. My hair was longer than it should be, and it was completely unkempt. I was disgusting. I stared at myself in awe. I became completely lost in my reflection when suddenly I smiled. Well, I didn't. My reflection did. At least I think it did. Nah, I must have imagined it. I probably should stop drinking on these meds. I turned off the TV and slowly thudded my way up the stairs. I threw myself into my unmade mess of a bed and stared at the ceiling, like I always did until I would fall asleep. But sleep never came. I couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't get that face out of my head. My face. But he looked so full of life, so alive. Not like me, not like the shell I had apparently become. I had to look again. I thudded back down the stairs and into the living room, feeling completely ridiculous as I did so, but I had to see. I found myself in front of the mirror I hated so much, staring with anticipation, and after a few minutes, there he was, mirror me, the man I wanted to be. I stared into his eyes, and everything went numb. Minutes passed, hours passed, and next thing I knew, the sun had risen. It was morning. I had stood there all night and was now looking back at that shell of a man, the me I hated, the real me. I felt absolutely insane. How could I stand there all night? Was I hallucinating? Had I officially lost it? The weirdest part was that I felt comforted, cathartic, like when you tell someone something you've never told anyone before, and a huge weight lifts off your shoulders. The pain I had been feeling, the self-loathing, it was all gone. It was like a high, but that high was short-lived because the tiredness from not sleeping all night finally hit me like a punch to the face. I made my way upstairs and fell asleep the minute I hit the pillow. When I woke up, it was already evening. I stared at the time on my phone in shock. Since Alicia had left, I hadn't managed more than a few hours of sleep. But today, 12 whole hours. Probably not considered healthy, but God, did I need it. I headed downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed a drink of water. I stood against the countertop, sipping my water and scrolling through Facebook. I really wish I hadn't. There she was, Alicia. And there he was, the home-wrecking bastard with his arm around her. They were smiling from ear to ear, with a beautiful sunset behind them. It was so cheesy, but I was overcome with rage and jealousy. She never looked that happy with me. Never. Had our relationship meant nothing to her? Was I that easy to forget? Did our vows even mean anything? In sickness and in health? Apparently not. For richer or for poorer? Ha, yeah, right. I gripped the glass so hard I felt it crack beneath my fingers. I needed him. I needed Mirror Me. I ran to the mirror and stared at him, my hands bracing the shelf above the fireplace, rocking back and forth. Rage coursed through me. Then, after a few moments, he appeared. Same smile, same reassuring eyes, and I was numb again. Pure bliss. This became my daily routine. Sleep, eat, and spend time with Mirror Me. He was my safe space, my sanctuary, my best friend. I didn't need anyone else. I didn't need to feel or think. He started appearing to me in all the mirrors in the house, so I was never alone. And every day that I saw him, his smile seemed even bigger. The only downside was that every day after my mirror therapy, when the sun rose, the wave of tiredness that hit me was worse than the day before. I wasn't even making it to bed anymore. I was just sleeping on the couch. It was now early October. The dark nights were getting longer, which meant more time with Mirror Me. It was great, even if his smile had now gotten unsettlingly big. I stared into his eyes and lost myself, like I did every night, when suddenly I was shocked back into reality by a cheerful jingle. I glanced around the room in a confused daze. What the hell was that? It took me a few seconds to realize it was my phone. I couldn't remember the last time it rang. I almost forgot what it sounded like. I scrambled over to my phone and was instantly taken aback to see who was calling. A picture of Alicia and me filled the screen. What did she want? I took a deep breath and answered. "Adam?" she asked. I expected hearing her voice would send me into a spiral, but I felt nothing. Nada. Not a thing. "Adam? Are you there?" "What do you want, Alicia?" I asked bluntly. She sounded caught off guard. "There's no need to be hostile. I know we left each other on bad terms, but I just wanted to check on you. I passed the house a few times this week and it was in complete darkness. Are you "I'm fine," I snapped. "And how I am, or what I'm doing, is no longer your concern, nor is it your business." "Adam," Alicia interrupted. "We may not be together anymore, but I still care about you. I couldn't live with myself knowing you were suffering. I interrupted her with hysterical laughter. "You care about me? Did you care about me when you were sneaking around to sleep with him? In fact, you know what, I don't care. I don't care anymore. I'm not wasting my breath on you. I don't need you. I don't need anyone. I hate you. and I genuinely hope the rest of your life is full of misery and suffering."
I was met with silence from the other end of the phone. I broke it by delivering one final blow. "Now, if you're done snooping to see if I'm still pining after you, I'd like to go back to enjoying my freedom. I don't want to hear your voice again.
You make me sick." And with that, I hung up. I was shocked at myself. Yes, I was mad at her, sure, but I still loved her. Why did I talk to her like that? I would never talk to her like that. That was when I realized I was smiling, so hard it hurt my cheeks. I turned to the mirror and noticed I was smiling just like him,
and instead of the comfort it usually gave me, it filled me with unease. Something felt wrong. Very wrong.
I slowly stood up and backed out of the room. I needed to get to a room without a mirror. I needed to be alone for a minute. I needed to be away from him. I ran to our spare room. I knew that was mirror-free at least. I sat on the end of the bed. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't exactly call the police and tell them I thought there was something wrong with the me in the mirror. Nor could I call my therapist, because the only help I'd get is a straitjacket and a padded room. So I turned to the only place I could, the internet. There are all sorts of people on there. Surely at least one is bound to believe me or know something.
And so I Googled about mirror entities, demons, whatever I could think of, and scoured the results from top to bottom.
That's when I saw a post on a forum titled, "Don't Trust the Other You in the Mirror." I stared in awe. I didn't like the sound of this. I clicked and began to read. The post was by a user named SpiritWalker67. It read, "Okay, I know I'm going to sound insane, but I couldn't live with myself if I knew I hadn't at least tried to warn others. I had been attending AA meetings regularly. I had hit rock bottom and was really struggling. I was at my lowest when a woman named Tina approached me and asked if we could be each other's sponsors. I wasn't super into the idea, but I was willing to try. She was lovely and really seemed to have it together, so much so that I honestly wondered why she was even there. It was during our 4th phone call that she told me something I wish she hadn't. She could tell I was sinking further and had a suggestion for me. I know this is going to sound crazy, but please don't dismiss it without trying at least once."
I was already rolling my eyes, but I thought I'd hear her out. I was desperate. That's when she told me about something she had named mirror therapy.
She told me to dim the lights in my apartment, stare at myself in a mirror, and meditate. Lose myself. She again stated she knew how crazy this sounded, but assured me that the sense of inner peace I would feel would be worth it. I figured I'd try, and much to my amazement it worked, beyond belief. Not only that, but I felt like my reflection was staring at me with kind reassurance, the look I had so wished my family and friends had given me. I became addicted to mirror therapy. I lived for it. However, I noticed that when I wasn't at the mirror, I was overcome with lethargy. It was unbearable. If I left the house, I was like a zombie. It wasn't until I went to AA a few weeks later and saw Tina that I put 2 and 2 together. Tina wandered in, but she wasn't her usual quirky self. No, she was empty, dazed. I walked up to her to ask if she was okay, and audibly gasped when she turned to face me with a blank expression and eyes with no shine or life in them. She was like an empty vessel. And that's when it started to come together. My lethargy, Tina's zombie-like state. It was the mirrors. It had to be. I had no other explanation. I refused to believe Tina had relapsed because she was doing so well and really had her mind set on getting her life together. I didn't know where to turn. The internet was providing nothing, so I went to the only other place I could think of for answers, the library. I scoured the occult section from top to bottom for any mention of mirrors. Eventually, I found something, and it filled me with anxiety. It spoke about spirits within the mirror, and how when you are at your most vulnerable, the veil between us and them is weakened. It went on to explain that every time you look into the mirror, or other realm, the being on the other side takes pieces of your soul until there's nothing left, and you are empty. The only way to save yourself is to close their doorway forever. In other words, break all your mirrors. It's that simple. And so I headed home and did just that. Within weeks, my energy came back, and I was back to my old struggling self, which I never thought I'd miss. Again, I know I sound insane, but in hopes I reached just one stranger out there, going through what Tina and I went through. Please take my advice and don't trust the other you in the mirror. Destroy it before it destroys you. I sat there with my mouth open. I was shocked, scared, and for some reason, I felt betrayed. Even though Mirror Me never spoke, I still felt like he had lied to me. He had given me a false sense of security, made me feel like I had a friend. I had no choice but to say goodbye to the friend I had counted on for months. who never judged me or made me feel crazy. But I couldn't say goodbye without first confronting him. Stupid. I know it's not like he was going to answer me, but I had to get it off my chest and at least needed this relationship to have some closure. I wandered back down the stairs, slowly walking, eyes to the ground, toward the mirror. I couldn't help but feel heartbreak. I slowly raised my eyes to the fireplace mirror I had grown to love and was greeted by my familiar, comforting face. His smile was even bigger than last time. Now that I knew what I did about him, that smile made me incredibly uncomfortable. I looked him in the eyes. I know what you are. I know what you're doing. I'm sorry, but I can't let you have me. My eyes fell to the ground. Even knowing what you are, I still can't help but want to thank you. You were the only one who was there for me at my lowest. I won't forget you. I looked up to meet his gaze one last time and felt the most intense fear I had ever felt surge through my body. That smile was gone. Now he was frowning. Not just frowning, it was indescribable, full of anger. It was evil. His eyes were so wide they looked like they were about to pop out of his head at any moment. But I couldn't look away. That's when he did something that made me feel fear, like I had never felt before. His eyes got wider, and his mouth began to open wider and wider. Not horizontally like a smile, but vertically, wider than was humanly possible. I took a step back, trying not to take my eyes off him as I reached around the room, trying to grab anything heavy enough to shatter that awful face. My aimless flailing was getting me nowhere, and I averted my gaze for less than a second to grab the huge, ugly candle holder on the coffee table that Alicia had got one Christmas from her mother. As I turned back to throw it, I was met with something I couldn't believe I was seeing. Hands. So many hands. Seeping from every part of the mirror. Reaching for me. Grabbing for me. I closed my eyes tightly and threw a Hail Mary. I couldn't open my eyes. I just prayed and waited for the obscene amount of hands to grab me and do whatever they were going to do to me. When suddenly, the sound of glass cracking, a beautiful choir of shattering. I opened my eyes to see that mirror I had grown so fond of had broken into 100 pieces. I had never felt such relief. I exhaled hard. It was like I had been holding my breath for what felt like minutes without even realizing it. I ran upstairs and smashed all the other small mirrors that remained within the house without looking at them. It was done. It was over. And with that, he was gone. Forever. My friend. My therapist. My mirror me. My energy gradually returned to me over the weeks, and so did my pain and sadness. But I'd rather feel that than nothing at all. I still see him in my dreams, though. Almost every night, actually. Sometimes he has that comforting smile I had grown so attached to, but other times he has that awful, stretched, otherworldly mouth and frightfully wide eyes. I hate those dreams, but at least I'm alive, soul intact, and starting to get my life back on track little by little. So I'll leave you with this, the same advice Spirit Walker 67 gave me, which saved my life. No matter how good it makes you feel, no matter how amazingly at peace you are,